The summer heat was brutal that Tuesday afternoon. Sweat dripped down Tony's face as he worked under the hood of a pickup truck at Davidson's Auto Repair. He had been fixing cars at this shop for 3 years now, and everyone knew him as the guy who could make any engine purr like a kitten. Tony loved his work. There was something satisfying about taking something broken and making it whole again. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Tony looked up to see an elderly woman pushing an old bicycle through the entrance. The bike looked like it had seen better days. The chain hung loose, the brakes squeaked loudly, and one of the pedals wobbled with each step she took. The woman appeared to be in her 70s, wearing a simple floral dress and comfortable walking shoes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the lines on her face, her eyes sparkled with warmth. She looked around the busy shop, clearly unsure if she was in the right place. "Excuse me," she called out softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of air tools and running engines. "Is there someone who might be able to help me with my bicycle?" Tony set down his wrench and walked over to her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Tony. What seems to be the problem with your bike?" The woman's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure if you worked on bicycles here. This old thing has been acting up for weeks now. The chain keeps falling off and the brakes don't work properly anymore." Tony knelt down to examine the bicycle. It was clear that this bike had been well loved but hadn't received proper maintenance in quite some time. The chain was stretched and worn, the brake pads were nearly gone, and several spokes were loose. "How long have you had this bike?" Tony asked, standing up and dusting off his knees. "About 15 years now," the woman replied with a gentle smile. "My late husband bought it for me when I told him I wanted to stay active. I ride it everywhere, to the grocery store, to visit friends, and," her voice softened, "to the cemetery where he's buried. I go there every Tuesday to bring him fresh flowers." Tony felt a tug at his heart. He could see the love and memories this simple bicycle held for her. "Well, let's see what we can do to get her running smoothly again. What's your budget for the repairs?" The woman's smile faded slightly and she reached into her small purse with trembling fingers. She pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and some loose change. "I have about $23. I know it's not much, but it's all I can spare this month. My pension doesn't stretch very far these days." Tony looked at the money in her weathered hands and then back at the bicycle. He knew the parts alone would cost more than what she had, not to mention the labor. But something about this woman reminded him of his own grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Tony asked. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, but you can call me Rose," she replied. "Well, Rose, here's what I'm thinking. My boss is out to lunch right now and I've got about 30 minutes before he gets back. Why don't I take a look at your bike and see what I can do? Sometimes these old bikes just need a little love and attention." Rose's eyes widened with surprise. "Oh, I couldn't ask you to do that. I need to pay for the work properly." "Don't worry about that right now," Tony said, already wheeling the bike toward his workstation. "Let me see what's going on first." Tony lifted the bicycle onto his workstand and began his examination. The chain was indeed stretched beyond repair, but he remembered seeing a similar chain in the spare parts bin, one that had been sitting there for months because it didn't fit any of the motorcycles they usually worked on. The brake pads were shot, but he had some basic ones that would work perfectly. As he worked, Rose stood nearby, watching with fascination. "You're very skilled," she observed. "How long have you been fixing things?" "Since I was a kid," Tony replied, adjusting the derailleur. "My grandfather taught me. He always said that fixing things was about more than just the mechanical part. It was about understanding what something meant to its owner. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." He was. He passed away 5 years ago, but I still hear his voice every time I work on something. Tony smiled as he tightened the chain. "He would have liked you, Rose. He always had a soft spot for people who took care of their things and made them last." As Tony worked, other customers came and went. Some watched curiously as he labored over the old bicycle, probably wondering why a mechanic was spending time on something that wasn't worth much money. But Tony didn't care. This felt right. He replaced the chain, installed new brake pads, adjusted the seat height, oiled all the moving parts, and even polished the frame until it shone. The transformation was remarkable. The bike that had wheeled in looking tired and neglected now looked ready for many more years of faithful service. "There you go," Tony said, lowering the bike from the stand. "Give it a try." Rose climbed onto the bicycle and took a short ride around the shop's parking lot. The difference was night and day. The bike moved smoothly and quietly. The brakes responded perfectly, and the chain stayed exactly where it should be. When she rode back to where Tony was standing, there were tears in her eyes. "I can't believe it. It feels like a brand new bike. You've given me my freedom back." She reached for her purse again, pulling out the $20 bill. "Please let me pay you for this. I know you've done more work than this covers, but it's all I have right now. Maybe I could pay you the rest next month?" Tony gently pushed her hand away. "Rose, keep your money. Buy yourself some groceries or get those flowers for your husband. That's payment enough for me. But I can't let you work for free. That's not right." "You're not letting me work for free," Tony said with a warm smile. "You're letting me do what my grandfather taught me, to fix things for people who really need them fixed. That's worth more than money to me." Rose's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "You are a blessing, young man. Your grandfather raised you right." She paused for a moment, then added, "There aren't many people like you left in this world." As Rose prepared to leave, she reached into a small bag she had been carrying and pulled out a package wrapped in aluminum foil. "I baked these cookies this morning for my neighbor, but I think you deserve them more. They're chocolate chip. My late husband's favorite recipe." Tony accepted the cookies gratefully. "Thank you, Rose. That's very kind of you." "No, thank you," she replied, climbing back onto her bicycle. "You've made an old woman very happy today. I'll never forget your kindness." As Rose rode away, waving goodbye as she disappeared down the street, Tony felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had been working on expensive cars all day, but somehow fixing that old bicycle felt like the most important work he had done. What Tony didn't know was that his boss, Jim Davidson, had returned from lunch early and had been watching the entire exchange from his office window. And Jim was not happy about what he had just witnessed. Tony was still smiling as he walked back into the shop, the package of cookies tucked under his arm. He felt good about what he had just done. Sometimes helping someone felt better than earning money, and today was one of those days. He was thinking about Rose riding her bicycle to visit her husband's grave when he heard footsteps behind him. "Tony!" The voice was sharp and angry. Tony turned around to see his boss, Jim Davidson, storming toward him. Jim's face was red, and his jaw was clenched tight. Tony had seen that look before, and it never meant anything good. "Hey, Jim, I didn't know you were back from lunch," Tony said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Oh, I'm back all right. And I saw everything." Jim stopped just a few feet away from Tony, close enough that Tony could smell the beer on his breath. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Tony looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me. I saw you working on that old woman's bike. I saw you giving away free work using my tools, my parts, my time." Jim's voice was getting louder with each word. The other mechanics in the shop had stopped working and were watching the confrontation. Tony could feel their eyes on him, and he felt his cheeks getting warm with embarrassment. "Jim, I used my lunch break to help her. The parts I used were just sitting in the spare bin collecting dust. Nobody was going to buy them anyway," Tony explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's not the point," Jim shouted. "Those are company parts, and you don't get to decide who gets them for free. And don't give me that lunch break nonsense. You are using company tools, company space, and company electricity." Tony took a deep breath. He had worked for Jim for 3 years, and while Jim could be difficult, Tony had never seen him this angry before. "The woman only had $20, Jim. The bike was her only way to get around. She uses it to visit her husband's grave every week. I don't care if she uses it to fly to the moon." Jim's face was getting redder. "This is a business, not a charity." We're here to make money, not to hand out free repairs to every sob story that walks through that door. By now, everyone in the shop had stopped working completely. 2 customers who had been waiting for their cars were watching the scene unfold. Tony felt humiliated, but he also felt angry. What he had done was right, and he wasn't going to apologize for it. "Jim, calm down. We can talk about this in your office," Tony suggested, hoping to move the conversation away from the audience. They had gathered. "No, we're going to talk about it right here, right now. I want everyone to hear this so they know what happens when they think they can give away my profits." Jim crossed his arms and stared at Tony with disgust. One of the other mechanics, Carlos, stepped forward. "Come on, Jim, Tony's a good worker. He just tried to help an old lady." "Stay out of this, Carlos, unless you want to be next," Jim snapped without taking his eyes off Tony. Tony felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Look, Jim, I'm sorry if I upset you. It won't happen again. Can we just move past this? Move past this?" Jim laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can just apologize and everything goes back to normal? You cost me money today, Tony. That bike repair should have been at least $60 in labor plus parts. Instead, you gave it away for free." "The woman didn't have $60. She barely had 20. She's living on a pension," Tony said, his voice starting to shake with frustration. "That's not my problem, and it shouldn't be yours either. But apparently you think you know better than me about how to run my business." The way Jim said, "You think you know better," made Tony's stomach turn. There was something in his tone that went beyond just being angry about money, something that made Tony feel sick. "I've been here for 3 years, Jim. I've never caused any problems. I work hard, I do good work, and I've brought this shop a lot of repeat customers, you know that." "Yeah. Well, maybe I've been too easy on you. Maybe you've gotten too comfortable thinking you can do whatever you want around here." Jim stepped closer to Tony, and his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Let me tell you something about people like you. You always think you're entitled to give away what isn't yours. You think you can play the hero with other people's money." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air like a bad smell. Tony felt his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around the shop at his co-workers' faces and saw a mixture of shock and discomfort. They all knew what Jim really meant. "People like me?" Tony repeated quietly. "You heard me. You people always want something for nothing, always looking for a handout or trying to give away handouts. Well, not in my shop." Tony felt like he had been slapped. In 3 years of working at Davidson's Auto Repair, Jim had never spoken to him like this. Sure, Jim could be gruff and demanding, but this was different. This was ugly. "I think you need to be very careful about what you say next, Jim," Tony said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or what? You're going to do something about it? Let me save you the trouble." Jim walked over to Tony's toolbox and slammed it shut. "You're fired. Pack up your stuff and get out of my shop right now." The shop fell completely silent. Even the radio that usually played in the background seemed to have gone quiet. Tony stared at Jim in disbelief. "You're firing me for helping an old woman fix her bicycle? I'm firing you for stealing from me, for giving away my property without permission, and for thinking you run this place instead of me. And honestly, I should have done it a long time ago." Tony's hands were shaking now, but not from fear. He was angrier than he had ever been in his life, but he also knew that anything he said or did right now would only make things worse. "Fine," Tony said quietly. "I'll get my things." As Tony began gathering his personal tools from his workstation, he could hear Jim still talking, but now he was addressing the other workers. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. This is a business, not a charity. We don't give away free work no matter how sad the story is. Anyone who has a problem with that can follow him out the door." Tony packed his tools in silence while his coworkers watched. Some of them looked angry, others looked embarrassed, but none of them said anything. Tony understood. They had families to feed and bills to pay. They couldn't afford to stand up to Jim the way Tony wished they would. As Tony closed his toolbox for the last time, he heard the shop door chime. He looked up to see Rose walking back in, carrying a small bag. She had a big smile on her face. and was clearly coming back to thank him again or maybe to bring more cookies. But when she saw the scene in front of her, Tony packing his tools while Jim stood over him with his arms crossed, her smile disappeared. "What's happening here?" she asked quietly. Tony looked at her and then at Jim. He could have told her exactly what kind of man Jim really was. He could have explained how his simple act of kindness had been twisted into something ugly. But instead, he just picked up his toolbox. "Nothing to worry about, Rose. I hope you enjoy many more rides on that bicycle." As Tony walked toward the door, he could hear Rose asking Jim what was going on, but he didn't stay to listen to the answer. He pushed through the door and walked out into the afternoon heat, unemployed and humiliated, but somehow still glad he had helped her. What Tony didn't realize was that Rose had heard more than he thought. And Rose was not the kind of woman who forgot when someone showed her kindness or when someone else showed them cruelty. Rose pedaled her bicycle home slowly that evening, her mind racing with what she had witnessed at the auto shop. The smooth ride that Tony had given her bike felt different now. Every smooth turn of the pedals reminded her of his kindness, and every memory of his kindness made her angrier about how Jim Davidson had treated him. She had only caught the tail end of the confrontation, but she had heard enough. She heard Jim's raised voice, saw Tony packing his tools with quiet dignity, and noticed the uncomfortable silence from the other workers. Most importantly, she had seen the hurt in Tony's eyes when he walked past her on his way out. Rose had lived long enough to recognize injustice when she saw it, and she had lived long enough to know that sometimes good people needed someone to stand up for them. As she turned onto Maple Street, the neighborhood changed dramatically. The small houses and apartment buildings gave way to large estates hidden behind tall gates and perfectly manicured lawns. Rose's modest appearance and old bicycle looked out of place here, but she belonged more than anyone might guess. She pressed a button on a small remote attached to her keychain, and massive iron gate swung open silently. Rose pedaled up a long, winding driveway lined with oak trees that were older than most of the buildings in town. At the end of the driveway stood a mansion that could have been featured in architectural magazines. Rose parked her bicycle in the four-car garage next to a Bentley, a Mercedes, and a vintage Rolls-Royce that she hadn't driven in months. She preferred her bicycle for most trips around town. It kept her connected to the real world in a way that luxury cars never could. Inside the house, Rose walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture, original paintings, and family photographs spanning decades. But she didn't stop to admire any of it. She had a phone call to make. Rose settled into the leather chair behind the massive desk in her late husband's study. The walls were covered with awards, newspaper clippings, and photographs of her husband shaking hands with governors, senators, and business leaders from around the world. Robert Patterson had built Patterson Industries from nothing into one of the largest companies in the state. When he died 3 years ago, Rose had inherited everything: the company, the fortune, and the responsibility that came with both. But unlike many wealthy widows, Rose had chosen to stay involved in the business rather than just collect dividends. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Good evening, Mrs. Patterson," came the voice of David Chen, the current CEO of Patterson Industries. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. David, I need you to do some research for me. There's a man named Jim Davidson who owns an auto repair shop downtown, Davidson's Auto Repair. I want to know everything about him, his business, practices, his financial situation, his reputation in the community, everything." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. May I ask what this is regarding?" Rose leaned back in her chair and told David the whole story. She described Tony's kindness, the beautiful repair job he had done on her bicycle, and his refusal to accept payment. Then she told him about returning to the shop and witnessing the aftermath of Tony being fired. "This young man showed me more genuine kindness than I've experienced in years, David. And he was punished for it by a man who clearly has no understanding of what real character looks like." "I understand completely, Mrs. Patterson. Your husband always said that how people treat others when they think no one important is watching tells you everything you need to know about their character." "Exactly. And I was watching." Rose's voice grew firm. "I also want you to find out everything you can about Tony. I didn't get his last name, but he worked at Davidson's shop. He's been there 3 years, excellent mechanic, mentioned. His grandfather taught him to fix things. I'll have my team start working on this first thing in the morning. No, David. I want this information tonight. Pay whatever overtime is necessary. And I want our head of security to be ready for a visit to Davidson's shop tomorrow morning. David was quiet for a moment. In the 3 years since Mr. Patterson's death, he had learned to recognize when Rose was truly angry. It didn't happen often, but when it did, things changed quickly. Mrs. Patterson, are you thinking of making Davidson's an offer for our fleet services? Rose smiled for the first time since leaving the shop. Among other things, yes, we've been looking for local auto repair shops to handle maintenance for our company vehicles, haven't we? We have indeed. It would be a very lucrative contract for the right shop. Well, tomorrow we're going to visit Davidson's and see if they meet our standards for integrity and customer service. After hanging up with David, Rose made several more calls. She spoke with her head of security, her personal attorney, and the head of human resources for Patterson Industries. By the time she was finished, it was nearly midnight, but she had a plan in motion. Rose walked to the window of the study and looked out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Tony was probably wondering how he was going to pay his bills, now that he had lost his job. Somewhere else, Jim Davidson was probably sleeping peacefully, thinking he had taught his employees a lesson about not crossing him. Both of their lives were about to change dramatically. Rose thought about her husband, Robert, and the values he had built their company on. Treat people right and they'll treat you right, he used to say. Help others succeed and you'll succeed too. Jim Davidson clearly didn't understand those principles, but Tony did, and that made all the difference. She picked up a framed photograph from the desk, one of her and Robert at the company's 25th anniversary celebration. You would have liked Tony, she said quietly to the picture. He reminds me of you when you were young, more interested in doing the right thing than making a quick buck. Rose went to bed that night with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day at Davidson's Auto Repair. Meanwhile, across town, Tony sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills. Rent, utilities, car payment, groceries. Everything would be harder now without a steady paycheck. He had some savings, but not enough to last long. He would have to start looking for another job immediately. But despite his worry about money, Tony found himself thinking about Rose and hoping she was enjoying her bicycle. He wondered if she had made it to the cemetery to visit her husband's grave. He hoped the repair work would last her for many years to come. Tony had no idea that Rose was at that very moment setting plans in motion that would change his life forever. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness had touched the heart of one of the most powerful women in the state. And he certainly had no idea that Jim Davidson was about to learn a very expensive lesson about treating people with respect. Sometimes, the people we help are exactly who they appear to be, just ordinary folks who need a hand. But sometimes they're much more than they seem. And sometimes, kindness has a way of coming back to us in ways we never could have imagined. Tomorrow morning, 7 black SUVs would pull up in front of Davidson's Auto Repair, and nothing would ever be the same. Jim Davidson arrived at his auto shop that Wednesday morning feeling pretty good about himself. He had shown his employees who was boss yesterday, and he was sure word would spread that nobody messed with Jim Davidson's business. He unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights, expecting another profitable day. Carlos and the other mechanics trickled in over the next half hour, but the atmosphere was different than usual. Everyone seemed quieter, more tense. A few of them had called in sick, which was unusual. Jim didn't care. He figured they were just upset about Tony getting fired, but they would get over it soon enough. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Jim heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. Lots of car doors. He looked up from his paperwork to see something that made his jaw drop. 7 identical black SUVs were parked in front of his shop. They were the kind of vehicles that screamed money and power. Cadillac Escalades, each one looking like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Jim had never seen anything like it in his neighborhood. Carlos, come look at this, Jim called out, suddenly feeling excited. This looked like the kind of customers who could afford expensive repairs without asking questions about the bill. Men and women in expensive business suits began stepping out of the vehicles. They moved with the kind of confidence that comes from having serious money and serious power. Jim quickly ran his hands through his hair and straightened his shirt. These were exactly the kind of customers he had always dreamed of having. But then he saw her. Rose stepped out of the lead vehicle, and Jim's stomach dropped. She wasn't wearing her simple floral dress today. Instead, she was dressed in a tailored business suit that probably cost more than Jim made in a month. Her gray hair was styled perfectly, and she carried herself like someone who was used to being in charge. Behind Rose came a tall man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Next to him was a woman with short blonde hair who looked like she could be a lawyer. Several other people followed, including two large men who were obviously security guards. Jim's mind raced. This couldn't be the same old lady from yesterday. There had to be some mistake. But as the group approached his shop, he could see that it was definitely Rose. The same kind eyes, the same gentle face, but everything else about her screamed wealth and authority. "Good morning," Rose said as she walked through the front door. Her voice was calm and professional, nothing like the soft, grateful tone she had used yesterday. "I'm Rose Patterson, CEO of Patterson Industries. I believe we need to have a conversation." Jim's mouth went dry. Patterson Industries was one of the biggest companies in the state. Everyone knew that name. They owned factories, office buildings, and employed thousands of people. And this woman he had seen yesterday as just another old lady, was apparently in charge of all of it. "Mrs. Patterson," Jim stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Welcome to Davidson's Auto Repair. How can I help you today?" The man with the briefcase stepped forward. "I'm David Chen, CEO of Patterson Industries. We've been looking for local auto repair shops to service our company fleet. We heard about your establishment and decided to visit." Jim's heart started beating faster. A contract with Patterson Industries could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. This could be the break he had been waiting for his entire life. "That's wonderful," Jim said, trying to sound calm and professional. "We'd be honored to work with Patterson Industries. We provide excellent service at competitive prices." Rose walked slowly around the shop, examining the equipment and watching the mechanics work. Her security guards stayed close but tried to look casual. The other suits spread out, taking notes and photographs. "Tell me about your business philosophy, Mr. Davidson," Rose said without looking at him. "How do you treat your customers? How do you treat your employees?" Jim saw this as his chance to impress her. "We believe in honest work for honest pay. We don't give away anything for free, and we make sure our customers understand the value of quality service." "Interesting," Rose said, still not looking at him. "And what about customers who can't afford your full rates? How do you handle those situations?" Jim puffed out his chest. "Well, business is business, Mrs. Patterson. We can't run a charity operation. If people can't afford quality service, they need to go somewhere else or save up until they can." "I see." Rose finally turned to look at Jim directly. "And your employees? How do you handle situations where they might want to help customers who are struggling financially?" Jim felt like he was acing this interview. "I make it very clear that employees don't make those kinds of decisions. If they want to give away free work, they can do it on their own time with their own tools and parts. In my shop, we follow my rules." David Chen was taking notes on everything Jim said. The lawyer-looking woman was recording the conversation on her phone. Rose just nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Davidson, I have to ask you about something specific. Yesterday, an elderly woman brought her bicycle here for repairs. One of your mechanics fixed it for her. Can you tell me what happened after that?" Jim's confidence faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. He had no idea that Rose was that elderly woman. As far as he knew, this was just a test to see how he handled his business. "Oh, that situation. Yes, one of my former employees decided to give away free repairs without my permission. He used company time, company tools, and company parts to fix someone's bicycle for free. I had to let him go immediately." "You fired him?" "Absolutely. I can't have employees thinking they can give away my profits whenever they feel like it. It was a clear case of theft, really. theft of time and materials. Rose's expression didn't change, but David Chen and the other Patterson Industries executives exchanged glances. The security guards moved slightly closer to Rose. "What was this employee's name?" Rose asked casually. "Tony something. I don't remember his last name. He'd been here 3 years, decent mechanic, but clearly didn't understand how business works." "And the elderly woman with the bicycle, did you speak with her?" Jim shrugged. "Briefly. I explained that we don't do charity work. She seemed to understand." Rose walked over to where Carlos was working on a car engine. "Excuse me," she said to him. "Were you here yesterday when this incident occurred?" Carlos looked nervously at Jim, then back at Rose. "Yes, ma'am, I was here." "Can you tell me what you witnessed?" Jim stepped forward quickly. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't think we need to bother my employees with—" "I'd like to hear from him directly if you don't mind," Rose said firmly. Carlos took a deep breath. "Tony fixed the old lady's bicycle during his lunch break. She offered to pay him, but he wouldn't take her money. She didn't have much. Tony's a good guy. He's always been fair and honest. When Mr. Davidson came back and saw what happened, he got really angry and fired Tony on the spot." "Was there anything else?" Rose asked gently. Carlos hesitated, looking at Jim again. "He said some things about Tony that weren't right. Things that made all of us uncomfortable." Rose nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." She turned back to Jim, and for the first time he saw something cold and dangerous in her eyes. "Mr. Davidson, I need to tell you something. I was that elderly woman with the bicycle. Tony fixed my bike with such care and kindness, and when I tried to pay him, he refused my money. He told me to buy groceries or flowers for my husband's grave instead." Jim's face went white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. "I came back to thank him again and walked in just as you were humiliating him in front of your staff and customers. I heard enough to understand exactly what kind of man you are, Mr. Davidson." The shop had gone completely silent. Every mechanic had stopped working and was watching the confrontation. "Mrs. Patterson, I had no idea. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently?" Rose's voice was ice cold now. "But you felt perfectly comfortable treating an old woman with disrespect and firing a good man for showing kindness?" Jim was sweating now, desperately trying to find words that might save the situation. "I can explain everything. There were business reasons. Tony violated company policy. The only thing you need to explain, Mr. Davidson, is why Patterson Industries should ever consider doing business with someone who treats people so poorly." Rose turned to David Chen. "I think we've seen enough. This establishment does not meet our standards for integrity, respect, or basic human decency." As the Patterson Industries team prepared to leave, Rose looked around the shop one more time. "Gentlemen," she said to the mechanics, "any of you who are interested in working for a company that values both skill and character should contact our Human Resources Department. We're always looking for good people." Then she looked directly at Jim. "Mr. Davidson, you had a chance to work with one of the finest young men I've ever met. Instead, you chose to destroy him for showing the kind of kindness this world desperately needs. That tells me everything I need to know about you." As the 7 black SUVs pulled away from Davidson's Auto Repair, Jim stood in his doorway watching his dreams of wealth and success disappear down the street. Behind him, he could hear his employees talking quietly among themselves, and he realized that his problems were just beginning. Tony was sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop, scrolling through job listings online when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway, hoping it might be about work. "Hello, is this Tony Rodriguez?" came a professional voice on the other end. "Yes, this is Tony. My name is Linda Wu, and I'm the head of human resources at Patterson Industries. Mrs. Rose Patterson would like to speak with you. Would you be available to meet with her this afternoon?" Tony almost dropped the phone. Patterson Industries was one of the biggest companies in the state. He had no idea why they would want to talk to him, but he wasn't going to turn down any opportunity. "Yes, absolutely. When and where?" Would 2 o'clock at our downtown office work for you? I'll send you the address. 2 hours later, Tony walked into the gleaming lobby of Patterson Industries wearing his best shirt and tie. He had never been in a building this fancy before. The lobby had marble floors, expensive artwork on the walls, and a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Linda Wu met him at the elevator and escorted him to the top floor. As they rode up, Tony's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they needed someone to work on their company vehicles. Maybe they had heard about his skills from another customer. The elevator doors opened directly into Rose's office, and Tony's jaw dropped. The space was bigger than his entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. But what really surprised him was seeing Rose sitting behind the massive desk, looking completely at home in her business suit. "Tony," Rose said, standing up with a warm smile. "Please come in. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Tony walked forward, still trying to process what he was seeing. "Rose? Mrs. Patterson? I don't understand. You're the same person whose bicycle you fixed yesterday?" "Yes." Rose gestured for him to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "I owe you an explanation and much more than that." As Tony sat down, Rose began to tell him her story. She explained how she had inherited Patterson Industries from her late husband 3 years ago, and how she often went into the community in simple clothes to understand how ordinary people lived. "The bicycle wasn't just a disguise, Tony. I really do ride it everywhere. After spending 40 years building this company with my husband, I learned that staying connected to real people was the only way to stay grounded. Money and power can make you forget what really matters." Tony listened in amazement as Rose described how she had witnessed his firing yesterday and how angry it had made her. "This morning I paid a visit to Mr. Davidson with my executive team. I wanted to see if he would treat wealthy potential customers the same way he treated you." The answer was very revealing. "You went back to the shop?" "I did. And Mr. Davidson showed me exactly who he really is. He bragged about firing you. He said you had stolen from him by helping me. He showed no remorse and no understanding of basics, human decency." Rose opened a folder on her desk. "Tony, I've had my team do some research. You've been working as a mechanic for 8 years, ever since you graduated from technical school. Your former boss at Miller's Garage said you were the best worker he ever had, and he only let you go because he was retiring and closing the shop. Your instructors at tech school remember you as someone who always helped struggling classmates. Your neighbors describe you as the person they call when they need help with anything." Tony felt overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Your actions speak for themselves. The question is, what do you want to do next?" Rose stood up and walked over to the window. "Patterson Industries has been looking for someone to head up our new automotive service division. We have a fleet of over 200 vehicles, cars, trucks, delivery vans, company buses. Right now we contract out all our maintenance and repairs, but we want to bring it in-house." She turned back to Tony. "I'd like to offer you the position of automotive services manager. You would oversee a team of mechanics, manage our vehicle maintenance schedules, and ensure that our entire fleet stays in perfect condition. The starting salary is $85,000 a year, plus full benefits, vacation time, and profit sharing." Tony's eyes widened. That was more than double what he had been making at Davidson's shop. "But that's not all," Rose continued. "I believe you have the potential to do much more than just manage our fleet. If you're interested, I'd also like to provide you with the funding to eventually open your own garage. Consider it an investment in someone who understands that business should be about more than just making money." Tony sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Yesterday he had been fired for doing the right thing. Today he was being offered opportunities he had never dreamed of. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Tony. You've already shown me that there are still people in this world who care more about helping others than helping themselves. That's worth more than money." Meanwhile, across town, Jim Davidson was discovering that his problems were just beginning. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened at his shop. By noon, 3 customers had called to cancel their appointments. By evening, 2 of his best mechanics had quit. Carlos had been the first to leave. "I can't work for someone who treats people the way you treated Tony. he had said, as he cleaned out his toolbox. And I especially can't work for someone who says the kind of things you said about him. The local newspaper picked up the story after one of the customers who witnessed Tony's firing called their tip line. The headline read, "Local Mechanic, Fired for Helping Elderly Customer." The article didn't mention Rose's real identity, but it did describe how a skilled worker had lost his job for showing kindness to someone in need. The story was shared hundreds of times on social media. People began leaving negative reviews of Davidson's Auto Repair online. "If they'll fire someone for helping an old lady, what does that say about their values?" wrote one reviewer. Within a week, Jim was struggling to keep his doors open. His staff had quit, and customers were taking their business elsewhere. He tried calling Patterson Industries to apologize and beg for another chance, but his calls were never returned. A month later, Jim was forced to put the shop up for sale. The stress had taken its toll on his health, his marriage, and his reputation in the community. He had learned the hard way that how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter is actually when it matters most. The shop was eventually bought by a group of investors backed by Patterson Industries. They renovated it completely and reopened it as Community Auto Care. The new owners reached out to all of Jim's former employees and offered them jobs at higher wages with better benefits. Tony, meanwhile, was thriving in his new role at Patterson Industries. He had hired a team of skilled mechanics and had streamlined the company's vehicle maintenance program so efficiently that they were saving money while keeping their fleet in better condition than ever before. But the best part of his new job was that Rose had given him permission to use company resources to help people in need. Once a month, Community Auto Care offered free basic repairs for seniors, single parents, and others who were struggling financially. They called it the Rose Patterson Community Service Program. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, exactly 3 months after that life-changing day, Tony was working in the Patterson Industries garage when he saw a familiar figure through the window. Rose was riding her bicycle up to the building, just as she did every week when she visited the cemetery. Tony walked outside to greet her. "How's the bike running, Mrs. Patterson?" "Perfectly," Rose said with a smile. "Just like everything else you've touched since you started working here." As she prepared to continue her ride, Rose paused. "Tony, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't helped me that day?" Tony thought for a moment. "Honestly, Mrs. Patterson, I don't think I could have done anything different. My grandfather taught me that helping people isn't something you do when it's convenient or profitable. It's something you do because it's right." Rose nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of all the good things you're going to do." As Rose rode away on her perfectly maintained bicycle, Tony smiled and went back to work. He had learned that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems like it is. Sometimes it just takes a little time for it to come back to you in ways you never could have imagined. The 7 black SUVs had indeed changed everything, but not just for Tony and Jim. The whole community had learned that treating people with respect and dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's also good business. And sometimes the person you help might just be someone with the power to change your life forever.